am looking forward to talking to you all about online safety and porn literacy. So really great topics. Jacob has already introduced me, but some more information. I've been an educator for over 20 years. I started out, actually not on this slide, but I started out as a music teacher. I was a violinist in a couple of previous lives and taught violin and viola. And then I moved into classroom teaching. I was a special education teacher in New York City public schools. And then that led me into pursuing my doctorate at the University of Washington. And now I'm an associate professor, and I work with those who are seeking credentials and master's degrees in special education. And as Jacob mentioned, I work for California State University East Bay in doing their credentialing and masters. I've also been a BCBA since 2011. And mostly that was through being an educator. So I always see myself as an educator first, and then a behavior analyst, because my roots are in education. And so now I provide direct services with Empowered. And one other piece of my education, besides all of this, is that I do have a certificate in sexual health from the University of Michigan. So just to give you some more information on my credentials on being able to talk about this topic, rooted in education with a behavior analytic framework and additional training around sexual health. So that's a little bit about me. I have a brief disclosure statement that just says I do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose. You have heard about my background, and no conflicts of interest to disclose. So today we're going to talk a bit about online safety. I have tried to kind of parse down some specific skills that would be important around in online safety. We will spend a bit of time on porn literacy, getting to know what that is, some background information on that, and how we can use that information to support the individuals we do. And then some ethical considerations around these topics, followed with a case study. So my objectives are today, I know you saw this on the flyer, but just so you can see how I've organized the presentation, we'll talk about some basic online safety skills that should be considered in sexuality education for youth with IDD, some concepts of porn literacy and some of the key learning ideas around that, and then ethical considerations for addressing pornography use from a practitioner perspective specifically. Okay, so diving in. First, we're going to talk about being safe online. We want to identify what does it mean to be safe online. And this is, for one consideration, can be a bit of a moving target. So I try to kind of think about what are some big ideas around some of the issues that we see now around being safe online, and how these could be applied moving forward. So things like keeping personal information private, right? That's one way we can be safe online, is making sure that we're not sharing information like addresses and phone numbers, birthdays, those kinds of private information online. And how do we teach youth how to keep that personal information private and how to decipher when it's appropriate to share that and when it's not. Another is around boundaries, setting boundaries, whether that means on online use and being online, boundaries with relationships that are online, and boundaries of where you're going to go in online spaces and where you're not going to go. And then another huge component that we see a lot around online safety is protecting mental health. So you'll see the skills that I've identified will all fit into these three categories in some way. But protecting mental health is a really key issue, especially for teens and adolescents right now, around staying safe online and making sure that they are not going into areas that are going to harm their mental health, and not winding up in those spirals around online use. So we'll see the skills I've pulled out will fit into these overall themes of staying safe online. Now, the next two slides, I have pulled out 8 skills I want to talk about. The first four are not specific to online spaces, but I don't really want to call them prerequisite skills because they could be taught at the same time. They are things that we want to consider what skill level the individual that we're working with has on these. So I'm not calling them prerequisite. They could be co-requisite, but they are part of the overall picture of being able to stay safe online. So one really big skill, especially that we can see with our IDD population, is around public and private behaviors and events, is being able to decipher what kinds of things are okay to do in public versus private, and what we would expect, and also what is public and private. So those things are really important to be able to identify. And it's something that is one of those skills that typically we pick up on that as we grow up. We learn what those are, but that's not something we can assume for our individuals with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. They may not pick up on that. That's a bit of a hidden curriculum in our social bringing up, and so they may not pick up on those skills. So there may need to be some more direct skill development around public and private spaces, public and private behaviors, and those kinds of expectations. It's also compounding with that is the fact that some of our individuals that we support with IDD also need help in private spaces. And so that can kind of conflate what is public and what is private. If they need assistance toileting, well, toileting, going to the bathroom is usually a private event. But if you need assistance with that, it can get a little bit confusing that that is still a private event, but you need assistance with that. So this skill can be a lot more complex, right, than it seems on the surface. So while it's not specific to online safety, that is a basic social skill and being able to recognize expectations. And we can apply that into online spaces of like, is this a post that's going to go public, or is this a private chat? Is this a private text message? And that is so a basic skill. Another huge area, and this seems deceiving, right? So I've said skill 1, skill 2, skill 3, skill 4. There is a lot of complexity in each of these. So I'm giving a broad overview, right? I don't have quite enough time. If we had a longer workshop, I could spend more time detailing these, but I'm trying to give some overview information to get you started and introduced to this idea, okay? Skill 2, again, another very complex skill, consent skills. Consent is often talked about as being either you know consent or you don't know consent, but consent is actually a complex list of tasks. And a lot of it is social, being able to read social situations. And there are steps to identifying consent. And there's, if it doesn't go this way, will it go this way? And the way that people say yes and the way people say no, and being able to interpret those. So it's a very complex skill. So that's why I'm calling it consent skills and not just consent, right? But consent is needed across a lot of domains, and online is sometimes somewhere where it can be a bit ambiguous. Consider, have you had a picture sent to you that you didn't ask to have sent to you? And so that's an example of you didn't consent to that picture being sent to you. And what would you do then? Right. And so teaching the skill of something is sent to you, somebody says something to you that you don't like, you didn't consent to. What's your reaction? So consent skills are another area that leads into online safety, being able to identify those. Another skill, and we'll see this in my next set, closely related. I will talk about trolling and cyberbullying, as well as grooming and catfishing. A skill that's related to that is flirting versus harassment. So being able to tell the difference between flirting and harassment. Again, one of those things that there can be really fine gray lines on, depending on the context. And so often needs really direct instruction and direct skill building around the difference between that, whether it's interpreting flirting versus harassment, or what I've more seen in my clinical experience is being able to differentiate your own behavior of, are you flirting, or has this gone into the arena of harassment now? That you are not paying attention to the no or the social cues to back off and leave alone. So that's when somebody has difficulty understanding that difference. Harassment can lead to serious consequences, right? And so when we have an individual who believes that they're flirting, but it's actually moved into harassment because they won't leave somebody alone, we now are in the realm of getting into offense. And that can become very serious. So we want to be able to teach these skills. And then the other skill in here, this one's a big catch-all, I know, but healthy relationships, right? This is a foundational concept within sexuality education, is healthy relationships. What does a healthy relationship look like? What do you do if you're in a relationship where things don't feel good and you want to get out? Who has access to what in your life, whether it's information, hugs, high fives, fist bumps, what is it? Who has access to that in your different social circles, right? Again, an area that can get really complex when we have individuals as they get older and they need support in private behaviors, toileting, bathroom, showering, other personal things. And as well, I know we're mostly talking about youth, like teenagers, younger adolescents, but when they move on, if they move on into supported living, it gets even more complex. Now they have staff who may be living in their homes with them, and that's not family, that's staff. And how do we differentiate those circles, those social circles, right? That can get really, really complex as they get older. So healthy relationship as a skill foundation leads to, online safety, recognizing that people online that you've never met in person are strangers, which means that we don't give them certain information, right? So that's very closely related. All right, these now are a group of 4 that are actually related to specific online skills. So sharing information online, identifying what's safe and not safe to share with people. What are the potential consequences of sharing too much information, especially personal information? So being able to understand, if I give somebody who I don't know in real life my address, what could happen if they have my address? What could happen if they have my birth date and I gave them some other piece of personal information? And so paying attention, being able to talk about those boundaries and what information we keep private, keeps us safe. Okay. Again, it seems like a cut and dry, well, yeah, of course you would not tell strangers that, but then we get into, if they are managing accounts online, their banking, those kinds of things, where is it okay to share certain information, or where is it not okay? Trolling and cyberbullying is another one. This is related to that big concept of mental health, right? And this can go both ways, right? What does it mean to be trolling and cyberbullying somebody? And what does it look like if you are getting trolled and cyberbullied? What are things that you can do? And I think this is really important. I don't know, being in the here and now, if anybody is into documentaries like I am, but there's a big one that's out right now that everyone's talking about, Unknown Number. So some cyberbullying with text messaging. That one was wild. I won't give it away. But that kind of context of what do you do? And we see a lot that schools don't necessarily handle it super well. They're not really sure. They're not really educated on how to do that. And parents aren't sure what to do and may not handle it in certain ways. So how do we teach those skills? And then when it is occurring, how do we help support? So 2 different things. But yeah, trolling and cyberbullying, a really, really big issue for our adolescents right now, because so much is online. We're doing so much online. Relatedly, catfishing and grooming is another area. And I'm not going to say that this is our population with IDD have certain risk factors related to catfishing, being more susceptible to catfishing and grooming. But this is, again, not only related to our population, right? Okay, another documentary. Yes, I've been on like a documentary kick lately. I watched Love Con Revenge, okay, my other Netflix one. And that's grown women and men who were catfished or groomed into being defrauded, right? They were giving money to people. So this is a huge risk, right? This is the thing that you're here for, right? You're worried about online safety for a lot of reasons. One, it might be the cyberbullying that might be occurring. It could be, I'm concerned that they're going to be groomed into giving away money or giving away information that they shouldn't be giving. And so these are the skills we want to be able to teach what this looks like, and be able to build those skills, right? We can't control what people are going to do, but we can teach the skills to help them be more safe online. And my last skill on here is reality is online dating is a thing and it's not going to go away. All right. And so many of our individuals may at some point, maybe not right now, but at some point may be interested in dating using a dating app. So we can start teaching those skills. And it starts with these other things that I've talked about: healthy relationships, boundary setting, knowing what information to share online. In this last one, we're also going to teach how do you move from, all right, I met somebody online, I met somebody on an app, and I want to meet them in person, and how do I stay safe doing that? Okay, so how do I move it from an online relationship to an in real life, IRL relationship? And those skills around that we still apply things around healthy relationships, still apply that information about sharing information, where they fall at our social circle, okay, as they get closer, and how we stay safe that way. Okay, so big broad overview. I know I'm not giving you exact how to do's on all of these, but these are skills that we would want to look for. All right, I'm going to move into this one. All right, I started off soft with the online safety, and now we're going to jump right into porn literacy. Okay, here we go. So first, what is porn? Well, it's a very broad definition, okay? And this is where people get a little bit hung up because it can be a little bit gray. But the actual definition of porn is any visual, textual, or audio material intended to cause sexual arousal and excitement for the consumer. That's a lot of things, okay? And then there's also open to interpretation. Was it intended to cause sexual arousal and excitement, or did it just happen to cause sexual arousal and excitement? So there's some, gray area in this. I also wanted to warn real quick, yes, I'm going to use the word porn. I am not going to show anything explicit. Also, if you are using captioning, it may censor me, okay? Auto captions don't like the word porn, and they don't like the word pornography, so it may censor me, just giving you a warning. So nothing explicit, I promise. Some of the realities though. It's easily accessible. There are a lot of free options. It does not take much work to find pornography online. It's just the reality. It doesn't take much work, okay? And it's just more accessible than it ever has been before because of online. Even as states, there are some age verification laws that are going into place. There's a representation of a lot of different states here, so I'm not trying to tell you what your state said any specifically. I think we're all in different areas. Many of you I know are in Kansas, but we got Missouri, I'm in Michigan. We've got other states that are represented. So I'm not going to try to tell you what your state says. But even as they try to implement these age verification for certain websites or block websites or whatever it is, there are lots of loopholes. And I'm sorry, but teens are really good at finding ways around blocks. They are much better than any of us at figuring that out. So we just have to assume that they may be finding it, okay? And Gen Z porn use, that's our generation behind the millennials here. We don't have information on Gen A just yet that I've found, but it'll come soon. Maybe it is there and I just didn't find it. But Gen Z porn use is exponentially higher than previous generations. One report I saw, as much as 70% of Gen Z has viewed porn, whether intentionally or accidentally. So, you know, that's pretty high. I'd want to check that, but it's pretty high. Some of the reports are pretty high. Mostly this is attributed to access and prevalence of device uses, right? So Gen Z, Gen A are on devices quite a lot, and it's happening, right? And for our individuals with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, we don't have data on specific porn use there, but we've got to assume that they have access to devices. It's quite possible that they're viewing it. All right. One more thing I added onto this. I think it made it on before I sent off my slides, but I started seeing more about generative AI, and I don't know where this is going to go, but because of the rapid explosion of generative AI, so generative AI is specifically the creation of, you've probably been tricked. I've been tricked by videos that look very, very real, and they are not. Because of the use of this generative AI, videos and images for pornography are likely to appear even more, because now we don't need actual people to do things. Somebody can create a video using Gen AI. So we have to assume that it's going to get even more prevalent at this point. So what should we do? Oh, one note. I don't have enough time to spend specifically on this. So this is just a note for my professionals here. Porn addiction, we don't have that recognized as a clinical diagnosis, okay? The behaviors that are associated with addiction are not the same qualities as other addictive behaviors. However, if you Google, even in Google Scholar, even in professional Google spaces, if you search this, you will find quite a lot. It is really difficult to find good, solid information on pornography use without, you can get really far into something before you realize that there was an alternative, there was a possible alternative motive behind the article. It's really, really difficult to find good, solid information that isn't skewed or biased in some way, or using the porn addiction framework to talk about porn. So I just want to put this out here as like, it is hard to find this, but the porn addiction framework is not considered within evidence-based practice, and there is a better model for using that. So just wanted to put this out here. You can agree or disagree with me on that, but that's the information that I have. The behaviors that are typically associated with this may be better explained as compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is in the ICD, not yet in the DSM. It will likely get added to the DSM when that gets updated again or revised again. But I just want to put that out there about porn addiction. As you work with clients or families, you may hear concerns about porn addiction, and this may be an area you will gently try to shift away from, the framework away from, or maybe you're not going to be able to, but just want to put that out there. Okay. What I'm actually here to talk about is porn literacy. All right. Okay. So porn literacy is based on concepts of media literacy. So if you are familiar with the concepts of media literacy, it's really very similar. It's not intended to encourage the use of pornography, but to provide information so that there's informed decision making. So it's kind of based on the assumption, all the things that I just shared before, it's already being viewed, it's already being used. Our teens already have access to it. So let's teach some decision making and information about pornography so that they can make better decisions and be more reflective on it. Okay, so not intended to encourage, but we're teaching guidelines around consumption. Even if the purpose of the guidelines is when you are older, right? Because porn is really for older individuals, 18 and older. It's not for teens. This is a framework that you have for making decisions about this. Okay. So porn literacy is a framework developed by Hutchings for examining the information, images, and values about sex seen in pornography. Very similar. If you are familiar with media literacy, where we examine who's the intended audience, what's the purpose of this media, who benefits, like who's getting the money for this, what biases or stereotypes are being used, like what's the lean of this, who is it intended to sway, what biases are existing, that kind of thing. That's media literacy. And we're going to use that similar framework for porn literacy. Okay. Who's the intended audience? What's the purpose? Who benefits? What biases exist? All of those same kind of questions we're going to use when we're looking at a framework of pornography. Again, we are already assuming many young people are either actively seeking or accidentally viewing it. So it just gives a framework for processing. I think I already said that. Yeah. So provides a foundation for them to evaluate what they've viewed and moving forward, what they would view when they're older. So some of the standard messages that we see communicated through pornography, especially the free ones that are of like less high quality, right? There is, and I don't have time or space to talk about ethical porn because my conversation here is not about pornography per se, it's about porn literacy specifically, right? So we have other side conversations we can have about this, but about porn literacy specifically, we're trying to teach about what are the things that if you are going to see pornography, right, framing it that way, if you do see it or you have seen it, these are some of the messages you might have seen in that video you watched or the pictures that you've seen. Those messages are not usually very healthy, and many are harmful. Okay, so some things that we want to relate to back to those online safety skills. Consent in low quality porn, even in higher quality porn, is not always portrayed in the way that we actually should be using consent, right? It can be much more coercive, or it's not portrayed at all. We don't see any consent. Okay? Communication about sex before, during, and after, that's not very entertaining in the porn industry, right? So we don't see that. We don't see the negotiation beforehand. We don't see discussion during, and there's no aftercare occurring, right? So we don't see that. That communication is not reflective. The portrayal of pleasure and whose pleasure is centered. Right? Again, this is thinking about who is this for. That means that the pleasure, how it's shown, is not always healthy. And the person whose pleasure is centered is not always, it's not equal. There's no equality. Okay. And then there's also inaccurate expectations of sex and bodies. Okay. And this is where we are concerned about like mental health of our teens. If they are seeing this and then they're thinking that this is what's expected, that's where we have that mental health concern. Okay. So we want to teach about these frameworks of, okay, I know that you saw this, but here's some things that we want to talk about. Things in pornography are not real, right? There's usually extremely large breasts and penises. There's unrealistic body types, orgasms happening really quickly. That's not real life. Sometimes when people have sex, they don't orgasm and it's still okay. Like that is not an expectation you have to have. That sex scene in porn is what most people want. That may be a message that they take away. Well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that it can be more aggressive in porn than what most people are expecting to have during sex, right? So some of these are the messages communicated that we want to, neutralize or negate, right? Teach about to our adolescents. Okay. If porn use is intrusive, it's being used a lot, right? Because I started this talking about porn addiction. And some of you have been thinking, well, what if it is used a lot? What if I find out or somebody that I'm working with finds out that their teen has been viewing it and they're viewing it a lot. It's becoming disruptive. They're not getting other things done. They're locking themselves away in their bedroom. So what if it is intrusive? Okay. The first thing we want to do, all right, you are talking, I am a behavior analyst, so I'm going to want to find out what the function is or what the meaning is behind the use. Why? So focusing on curiosity. Why are we using this? Is it for stimulation? Is it for information? right? They're curious about sex, and so they're using that to learn more, find out more. Are they lonely? They don't have a lot of friends. They don't have, they want a relationship, but don't have a relationship. They just feel lonely. And so they're using it as a means of connection. Or maybe they're feeling they have some things going on around their identity and they're feeling more connected. They can see people that have similar identity, or they're kind of feeling related to or a connection to the people that they're seeing. So figuring that out, coming from a place of curiosity, will be much more productive, right? Once we have the function or the meaning, we can then solve and develop a plan to address what's going on. So one piece of advice I have for you is to respond and not react, right? So react would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this. Why are you doing this, right? But respond, okay, what's going on? All right, I know that this feels upsetting, but let me put that aside and let me respond. Give more positive messages. I just want to understand why we're watching this a lot, why you're shutting yourself away to watch this. And now let's look at some information. Okay, so if we're going to be doing this, what is some information that we can have, some facts that we can walk away with to learn more about this? So for individuals with IDD, these are some basic facts. So on the left side, I have three real basic facts, okay, that we can teach to those 18 and under about pornography. On the other side, for those that are viewing porn, right, and porn is only legal for those who are 18 and older, this is information that we can share with those that are older, okay? So basic facts: pornography with children is illegal, period, point blank. Okay. Watching or downloading porn with minors can get you in trouble. And pornography is for people who are 18 years old or older. Okay, so those are our basic facts around pornography. For those that are already viewing, again, 18 or older on this, these are some facts that we can teach that are really plain language around pornography use. Because if they're 18 or older, it's legal in most states, okay? So porn isn't real, just like TV and movies. It's for entertainment. They're acting, right? Things are edited. It's acting, just like you watching a movie. Actors are paid. They would not do anything there for free. Most people don't look like porn stars or have body parts like what's seen there. So trying to manage the expectations around what's been seen here. Most people don't have sex like what is shown in porn. Not everyone moans like a porn star. What the sounds in porn are meant to be for those watching. They're not meant for the people doing the acts. Sometimes in porn, people don't ask for consent. In real life, people need to ask for consent because that's the law. And porn leaves a lot of other things out of being sexual, like kissing, touching, holding hands, telling each other what you like and don't like, giggling. Those kinds of things are not very entertaining, so they're left out of pornography. So these are basic facts. These would be taught within the within sexuality education around that, when we're talking about healthy relationships, about dating skills, about consent, all of that. We can teach that in addition to those. Okay. So values and ethics. Ethical considerations when we are talking about this, or if we're teaching about porn literacy, if we are addressing porn use, whatever your context is, there are some ethical considerations. One is that you need to be aware of your own profession's ethics and scope of practice. So we have different professions represented in this room, so I can't be specific to each of yours, but you should be aware of your own profession's ethics and scope of practice. When it is out of your scope, you should refer or consult. I didn't include that on there, but consult is also appropriate, but referring out when it's out of your scope of practice, so that you can get that handoff to somebody who knows more about this topic. Being aware of laws. So it's illegal, period, to distribute porn to minors. So we're not providing access to porn to any minors that we're working with. And another one, and this is kind of a basis for a lot of professions, it is a basis for sexuality educators, is reflecting on our own biases and values. And sometimes our values are going to conflict with ethics. So we have our ethics code in our profession, and we have our values, and there may be a conflict between those. There's maybe something that's reflected in our ethics that maybe is not a value we hold, or vice versa. But as a practitioner, we are to follow our own professional code. So regardless of how you feel about pornography, we may encounter somebody who is using it, and we have to be able to separate, especially if it gets into the realm of like intrusive porn use, separate out our own values and not put those values on to that individual unless they're a family member, right? If it's your child, that's one thing, right? That is your right to instill your values in your child. If it is not your child, that's not your right to instill your values in them. So we have to be able to recognize the difference between our values and ethics. It gets hard when we start talking about these things that feel very taboo in our society. So we have to be really much more reflective on that. Your values may be that I don't like pornography, I'm not going to use pornography, and I don't find it appropriate to use pornography. That doesn't mean that it's not appropriate for somebody who is of age, 18 years or older, to use pornography in a way that works for them, right? So we have to keep that separated, which can be really tricky when we talk about these things. So values are personal beliefs and ideals that guide your own decisions, versus ethics are the standards of your profession. So bringing it all together, and I'm going to get to the case study in just a moment, is respond, don't react. Seek to find the purpose or the why. As professionals, we don't impose our values on others, and we follow our ethical guidelines. And information is powerful. Okay? So providing that information, providing that framework around porn literacy, even before use of that, being able to talk about it. You cannot even talk about porn literacy, even just watching a TV show. Again, I know I'm talking to professionals here, but if you're thinking about like, how does this connect? Or maybe you have a personal situation, watching a TV show and there's something that's shown and there's no consent, right? I keep pointing this out in shows I'm watching. Rewatching Gilmore Girls, and there's a lot of like non-consent that happens in that, just like random kisses from people and that kind of thing. And I'm like, that's an example of non-consent. So we can even talk about that in not very scary ways. We can use that framework to show, like in popular media, consent isn't always shown, and we don't have to show something inappropriate. Okay. So my case study here, my introduction to this is, we're actually going to do two cases, a supportive versus negative parental responses. I thought this would be appropriate for professionals because we may experience both of these. So some baseline information about this case. Adolescents with intellectual disabilities experience sexual curiosity. Okay, this is an assumption I've come into this with, all right? They are adolescents, just, they're 16 and they're just like any other 16-year-old. They have the same kind of curiosities as a 16-year-old would have. Pornography use raises unique challenges, particularly related to misconceptions, consent, and internet safety. And parent responses can strongly influence outcomes. So these are kind of my intro to the case study. All right, case A and B. Only difference between these two are the reactions from the parents. So in case A, with 16-year-old with intellectual disability, the parents discover pornography use after seeing a browser history. The reaction, they're shocked, but they avoid shame and they want to educate. So they decide that they're going to reach out to their pediatrician for advice and see, like, what do you advise? Case B, 16-year-old with intellectual disability, parents discover porn use. Their reaction, however, is shock, anger, punishment. They restrict internet use. They ground the teen. They lecture about how bad that is. After some conflict that continues in the house because of the restricted internet use and the grounding, they decide to, we're going to reach out to our pediatrician for advice because they are at their wits' end. They don't know how to resolve this conflict in their home. Okay. So the key differences in the parental responses in case A, with the supportive response, we've normalized curiosity. We've kept open communication We're seeking information. The parents have sought out support from the pediatrician in order to have this education focused, and they've continued to build trust. Case B, the negative response. We see more shame and punishment, some set up the environment to more secrecy. There's no communication about the pornography use, about why, no curiosity around that. There's more conflict around that, and that's going to erode trust within the household. So, discussion for a few minutes, and this is where you all get to discuss. How does parental response impact the teen's development? How should the pediatrician potentially approach each of these cases? What risks emerge if parental shame dominates? And what supports can providers offer to shift parents towards more constructive approaches? So thoughts on any of those questions, all of those questions? I know we don't know each other very well, so it can be really hard. Definitely a non-shame based approach is vital, especially from the get-go, from the start. It's definitely. Definitely with shame, we decrease communication. Yeah. And I'm not intending, with these cases, we're not intending to judge the parents. Reactions are reactions, right? We've seen parents react in a lot of different ways, from, you know, being supportive to that shame, that kind of like gut reaction. All right, so not the case isn't intended to judge the parents, but just from a practitioner perspective, you've got parents that may come to you and they are open and communicative, and you may have parents coming to you and they have their own shame about their child's use of, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my kid did this. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't like this stuff. You know, they may come with their own shame in this too. Nicholas says, regarding supports, I think remembering that everyone has a baseline and that all behavior serves a function. We can note parental reactivity is sometimes a reflection of caring and wanting to do the right best thing. So having compassion for them, even if they've been responding poorly up to this point. Yeah. I would hope, Lori says, I would hope the pediatrician would take the approach you just presented to help the parents seek out the why of who the teen was seeking out the porn, of why the teen was seeking out the porn. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right. Thanks all. So yes, pediatrician support, and you can like replace pediatrician with whatever professional, right? Parents go to the person that they think that they can get the most information from, and that may be a pediatrician, it may be an educator, it may be somebody else they have a close relationship with. So we take this broadly. So for case A, that was the supportive one. Pediatrician is going to reinforce the parent's instinct to educate and not shame. Great job. Yes. I'm sure that was really difficult to find. Way to go on focusing on education and being curious. Providing tools and resources for tailored sexuality education. And what I mean by that is finding sexuality education that is for the IDD population. Not all sexuality education is. And they may or may not have access to it in their school. That may or may not be possible. So we may have to find some more tools and resources that exist. And then the practitioner is also going to support ongoing open communication and provide some information on safe internet practices. Okay, so, you know, the other thing is if we suddenly find a teen, young adult who has gone onto these sites, we also want to like follow up and make sure that they know, do you know how to stay safe online? That's why I paired these two together, right? Online safety and porn literacy, right? Pairing that information together. For the non the non-supportive or the more reactive approach. Validate the parents' feelings of shock and discomfort. Yes, understand that must have been extremely shocking. Gently reframe that curiosity is normal. Porn is not a reality. Okay, being curious about sex and sexuality is a normal adolescent thing. Warn gently about harm, like, we want to make sure that we're being careful about not creating a situation where they may continue to hide their use of it and create more guilt, and now they're going to learn the wrong information about sex and sexuality. And redirect towards that more education focus, and still also offer resources and parent support. So we may not jump right into tailored sexuality education with these parents. We may provide resources about that, but we're really focused on like supporting the parent and getting them to a place that they're more open to that sexuality education, and more open to that education framework rather than kind of that secrecy framework. Sorry. So outcomes, the comparison, right? Case A, supportive teen is going to gain accurate information. Parents are going to feel more empowered. We're going to potentially reduce unsafe behavior. At least we would hope reduce that secrecy, right? Preventative, more preventative approach, and continue that open dialogue. And on case B, if that continues down that path without any kind of intervention with the parents, we risk the teen continuing in secrecy, the parents remaining distressed about this, continuance of high risk unsafe behavior, and communication shut down, right? Again, the secrecy. So key takeaways: parental responses can significantly shape outcomes. Yes. Teen curiosity is normal. A supportive approach is more empowerment, education, safer outcomes. Negative or shaming approach, more secrecy, mistrust, riskier behaviors. But practitioners, we can normalize curiosity. We can reframe concerns and offer resources. Okay. And I have worked with parents who have been concerned about porn use for their child and their teen. And my approach has been, providing more information, providing that support in reframing how we look at that, and providing more resources for the parents so that they can learn more about porn literacy, about messages that we can, that we might want to neutralize about the porn use, and being supportive in that way. So I have some online resources as I am working towards a wrap up here. I have these online resources here that I wanted to share. One is Autism Training. This is a curriculum. They also, and maybe you're not a practitioner who would actually implement a sexuality education. Elevatus also has online trainings and services, but they focus on sexuality ed for individuals with IDD specifically. They have a comprehensive sexuality education curriculum that they have that foundation on. I believe they're actually in the midst of updating that. They'll have a new one in publication in the next 2 years. Another resource, this one is not specific for the IDD population. However, the guides are really useful and could be adapted or modified. So there's the Porn Conversation, has resources for parents and educators. They are guides on talking with children and teens about pornography, and it's aged. So that's a really good resource. Amaze is my video resource with like lots of videos on sexuality education topics. There are videos on pornography. They're a bit more engaging for teens. May not use them for the younger kids specifically, but teens definitely. And while it's not really specifically guided for the IDD, I do like that it can be reused, right, to teach concepts and kind of be able to reinforce those concepts. Another resource is the National Council on Independent Living Sex Ed. This is a really cool video project for people with IDD. It was specifically created so that people with IDD could access the videos on their own, or somebody could support them in accessing the videos, and it provides more information. Okay. And then I had some book resources I wanted to provide. I have a caveat on one, but the other is Boyfriends and Girlfriends is a really good guide for dating. A lot of what we talked about today was around social skills, and being able to, be in healthy relationships and what that means and what that looks like. Taking care of myself is another good one. That one is for the ASD, autistic population. What is sex is another text. My caveat on the porn is not sex ed. This is a new resource. It is not going to be published until next week. I'm getting my book as soon as it's published. But based on the current reviews and the information on it right now, I think that this will be a really good resource when it comes out. It's an illustrated guide, so it will be accessible to others.